If you ever find the movie called Killian and the Kitty, don't watch it. Destroy it right away. Burn any copy of it that you can find. Whatever happens, don't let anyone see it. My hometown is full of murderers, but until now, they were hiding it pretty well. The place I am speaking of is called Mardon, and if you're not from our region, you probably haven't heard of it. The bigger cities around us make the news more often though. A while ago, when people weren't too happy with the political climate of the country, there was a period in which houses and cars were burnt regularly. Bricks would be thrown through local shops. There was a horrible case of kidnapping, and not even the police seemed to be able to do anything against it. Mardon never had these problems though. Nobody here would have dared to revolt like that. It's a beautiful place, small enough to feel safe and be close to your neighbors, but at the same time big enough so you don't get bored. We have a great art scene. There are town festivals organized all throughout the year, and the people seem genuinely happy. Who could have known that it would only take one small movie to bring out a deep-rooted lust for blood in the residents? The movie I'm talking about is called Killian and the Kitty. It's your typical feel-good animation film. A mouse falls in love with a cat, and through a series of events, he tries to win her heart. While the description of the movie sounded rather boring, I always liked going to our local movie theater. It wasn't one of those big cinemas that only show the mainstream stuff, but instead a cozy little place run by an old couple. You could tell how passionate they were about movies. They didn't even care about the money. They were pretty wealthy. All they wanted was to show people the beautiful art of cinematic narration. They spent a lot of time searching for hidden gems, independent productions, and they would screen a new movie each month. Always something really special that nobody had seen before, and that you probably wouldn't be able to catch at a different cinema. Killian and the Kitty was one of the monthly specials. My mom asked me to take my little sister Jen, and I was actually positively surprised. It's animated and the pictures are pretty adorable. While I'm not the biggest fan of these types of movies, this one was different. It just leaves you with a really warm and happy feeling. So I was in a good mood when I walked my sister back home. She was so excited about the movie that she didn't stop speaking about it even for a minute. After a while, I zoned out and mumbled, yeah, every once in a while. But then, she said something that caught my attention. And the mountains, and the town, and the mice were the best. But you know what I didn't get? The humans. They were creepy. Wait, what do you mean? They were all animals, weren't they? No, I mean the humans that showed up from time to time. I didn't like those. They looked scary, and why were they so angry? Killian was so nice the whole time. I had no idea what she was talking about. All of the characters were either animals or plants, and I didn't remember any of them acting angry. "Hello there," we heard our neighbor, Mr. Miller, say. He was about 60 and lived alone in that house ever since his wife passed away a few years ago. I remember being a bit afraid of him when I was younger, but now I didn't understand why. He seemed like a really sweet old man. "We just saw the new movie about the mouse. Have you seen it?" my sister exclaimed. "No, I haven't, but I heard only good about it." "Oh, it's really the best," she responded. "Well then, I guess I have to see it. You know, actually my niece is coming to visit soon. I might take her to go see it," Mr. Miller said. "Oh, can I come too?" "Jen, you literally just saw it." I rolled my eyes and smiled at Mr. Miller. "That would be no trouble at all. Just ask your mom first, alright?" Later that evening, Jen started acting out as I'd never seen before. She even came to my room and threw a glass against my wall, which shattered all over the floor. I had no idea where this was suddenly coming from. It was the first time that my mom would ever ground her. After my sister reluctantly went to bed, my mother received a really disturbing phone call from one of the other moms of Jen's school. The first of many disturbing events we would witness. Apparently, one of Jen's teachers, Miss Perkins, had brutally murdered her husband. Neighbors started hearing screaming from their house this afternoon and ran right over. The couple had never been heard fighting before. They seemed calm and polite all the time, but when the neighbors went to check if everything was okay, they noticed the bloodstains on the windows and immediately called the police. She had stabbed him 6 times in the chest and then started rubbing the blood all over the furniture. When the police arrived, they found her sitting next to his corpse, smiling. She didn't even bat an eye as they took her away. The news spread like a wildfire. Nothing remotely similar had ever happened in Mardon before, and the entire town was shocked. Parents were scared to send their children to school anymore, and there was a new vibe of mistrust going around. After my mom, who could hardly comprehend it herself, told me the news, there was one thing that made me feel really uncomfortable. I had seen Mrs. Perkins and her husband in the movie theater that afternoon. Jen ran over to chat with her for a while. They both seemed so happy. How did that turn into a murder scene just like that? Little did I know that it was only the beginning. The following weeks, news of horrible events spread around more and more. There had been 2 more murder cases, both domestic. One of them was a man who had filled his house up with gas, killing his wife, children, and himself. It was incredibly tragic, and just like the other cases, it came like a massive surprise. The other one was a woman who killed her senile parents who came to live with her a while ago. Now, we don't live in a village. There are quite a lot of people in Mardon, but we weren't used to all of this violence. The murders had been the worst part, but it seemed as if the violence had increased in general. I could swear that I noticed bruises on people's faces and arms. Nobody that I knew personally, but still. And while people didn't like to talk about this part, there was also an increased number of suicides. Our safe haven had turned to a scary place in no time, but one thing didn't change. Everyone still went to the movies. It was as if the story of Killian was the only thing making people happy at the moment, and so the couple owning the theater decided to extend the screening time. I'm not sure if everyone ignored it, or if they really didn't notice, but I couldn't get the thought out of my head that all these events had only started when this weird movie started playing. It didn't make any sense. It was just a story about a cartoon mouse, but somehow I couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to it, especially after what happened at the house of Mr. Miller. My mom had asked me to bring over some pies she had made. I rang the bell to Mr. Miller's house, and a little girl opened. "Hello, you must be Mr. Miller's niece," I said to the girl. She nodded. Something about her seemed off. She looked freaked out. "Is he home right now?" Before she could answer, we were interrupted by loud noises coming from inside the house. It sounded like shouting and crying. "What's going on?" I asked and almost walked inside the house, but my gut told me to stay outside. "Uncle Teddy is playing with the other kids. I wanted to go too, but it didn't look fun. He's mean to them." Suddenly I understood why I always felt so weird around Mr. Miller, and how fucking glad I was that my mother didn't let Jen go to the movies with them. He kept those children that had been kidnapped from the surrounding towns in his basement. For years he made sure to feed them and keep them alive. He had been careful, never taken kids from Mardon, and made sure nobody would ever notice any of it. But apparently, he must have felt extremely impulsive that day, after seeing Killian and the kitty in the theater. If I had walked over just a little later, he would have murdered every single kid in there. He was already preparing for that. The children were all traumatized, but at least they survived. Still, I can't even put into words how disgusted and disturbed I felt. This was so utterly wrong. Our neighbor, who always seemed so nice, managed to do these unspeakable things for years without anyone finding out. I kept wondering if there was something about the movie that startled him. Obviously, he was fucked up as it was, but he hadn't killed any of the children. But that day, his need for blood grew so big that he even forgot, or ignored, that his own niece was in the house. It still makes me shiver to think about it. The next day I went over to my buddy Chris and told him about my suspicions. He hadn't seen the movie himself, but thought I was acting crazy. How can a movie about some mouse make some people suddenly become murderers? He joked. That day, we decided to go see the movie together, but this time I would take a camera and film it all. That way we could analyze it afterwards. We sat through the whole thing. It was the same happy animation film I remembered. Cute, colorful, and as last time, I left with a warm feeling inside. It almost made me forget about all the shit that had been going on. Chris, on the other hand, was acting really strange afterward. He didn't seem angry or anything. Quite the opposite, actually. He hardly spoke. He wouldn't look at me, kept drifting off with his thoughts. We initially had planned to go to his place and analyze the thing together, but he muttered some excuse and just left. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little worried that he would do something, but he lived alone and I saw him go inside his apartment. I got home as fast as I could to check on the movie I had secretly recorded. I listened to the music, the dialogue, looked at all the different characters, but I just didn't understand what could be wrong with the movie. I almost gave up my strange idea that the brutality was connected to Killian, and so I paused the movie to go and have something to eat. And that's when I started understanding what Jen had been speaking about the first time we saw it. I had pressed pause at a scene I didn't remember ever seeing. It didn't belong in the movie. It was the picture of a man hanging from a ceiling with a rope around his neck. I automatically pressed play again to get away from that image. How had I not noticed this in the cinema? I swallowed and continued going through all the different frames. There were scenes of a woman stabbing a child. Another one of a man with a big smile, cutting through a woman's throat. These were the milder ones. I don't even want to speak of the other things that I saw. I almost threw up from some of the stuff in there. Those frames, however, were embedded in an entirely subliminal manner. Like that speech of Bush, where the word rats appear on the screen for a fraction of a second to create negative associations with gore, I believe. In that ad, you can actually spot it though, if you pay attention. In this movie, it was so subtle that I still don't understand how Jen was able to catch any of it. I kept staring at the screen in disbelief. Thoughts were racing through my mind. I knew I had to tell the old couple from the cinema. I had to tell everyone. But one particular thought made me worry the most. Chris. I got up and jumped in my car. I tried calling him the entire time, but he wouldn't pick up. I got to his apartment and kept banging his door and ringing the bell, but he didn't open. Finally, I got the caretaker to open up. We were just in time to cut open the rope and save my friend. The copy of the movie that the old couple of the cinema owned was destroyed. The strangest thing was that they didn't even know who it came from. They were in contact with the person who sent the movie in. He said he was a film student and that he would like them to show the movie for free if they enjoyed it. As I said, it was a tiny movie theater showing mostly experimental stuff, so it wasn't too uncommon, and the couple didn't ask many questions. They never saw this guy in person. They had a phone number and an address, but it turned out that the letter was fake, and they never managed to reach the number again. I spent the next weeks researching the concept of subliminal priming to the brink. If you haven't heard of it, a subliminal message is the presentation of some form of information that you are not consciously aware of. The concept of subliminal priming revolves around the question of whether these messages could somehow influence you without your knowledge. It's mostly studied in advertisements, for obvious reasons. However, most of the information I found on it states that it's not really effective, and a majority of studies providing its effects have been debunked. Apparently the primes only work under very specific circumstances. Like, if you put a subliminal prime of a can of Coke in a film, it would probably not work. However, it might work if the person is already thirsty. If they were planning on doing the action anyway, in that case, it can enhance something in the mind that had already been present. I'm almost sure there must be more to it, but I feel like that's what the intentions of the movie maker were. I mean, those weren't random people in Mardon who suddenly decided to hurt and murder others out of nowhere. They had simply been hiding their urges before, and Killian gave those ones a push who were thirsty for blood already.